come November 5th, okay, we are live. Nearly half of all Wisconsin school districts will have gone to referendum in 2024, asking for almost $6 billion in total from Wisconsin residents in districts scattered across the state. This will be our topic of discussion today, Thursday, October 31st, 2024. Oh, it's Halloween. Happy Halloween. Very good. I'm your host, Ben Dryden, and you are watching DrydenWire Live, presented by Americans for Prosperity Wisconsin. AFP Wisconsin works for, what the frick is that? I'm not going to lie, that scared me a little bit.
Good morning.
Good morning. Let me get to my, oh my goodness, that scared me. AFP Wisconsin works to reignite the American dream and break down government barriers that hold us back from our full potential. Find an event near you at afpwisconsin.com and join AFP to fight for more freedom for all Wisconsinites. That's freaking me out. Joining us today is Wisconsin's 25th District Senator Romaine Quinn. I'm assuming that's who that is under that mask. In 75th Assembly District Representative Dave Armstrong, who of course is now running in the 67th Assembly District after recent redistricting. Gentlemen, good morning. Romaine, what the what? That freaked me out.
You can tell it's Halloween.
Happy Halloween. If that one wasn't scary enough, I wore my trash bag so I can go as a piece of garbage.
Oh,
Not get the fun. So, just kidding.
You're full of it,
we
boy.
don't do politics on this show.
Yeah, so right before we went live, he's like, hey, let's go grab
Morning.
something. So I figured, he'll just be back on in a second. I did not know that's what you were grabbing.
Here we are.
Oh, my goodness. Gentlemen, good morning. Romaine, how are you?
I can breathe a lot better now. Thank you.
Yeah. How's it going?
Good. Happy Halloween.
Yeah, no kidding. We're supposed to be getting snow here today.
What's sad about this, though, is it seems like every Halloween it's a lousy day for the kids.
Who cares? The kids, they're resilient. They'll be fine.
It's like a Halloween Scrooge.
If they want candy, they'll go get it.
No kidding. All right, so obviously, there's a few things I want to talk about today, but the biggest thing, of course, is there was an article that I read. Actually, let me back up. My brother Matt called me yesterday and said that he had talked to a few people, and his wife's a teacher, my sister-in-law, Christina, and someone else, I believe, through Northwoods Technical College, and, just talking about referendums and kind of the education system. And he was asking me questions. Honestly, that's a world that I don't really know, or, I pay attention to, like, Shell Lake School District is having one, and Spooner just had one, but I don't really look across the whole state. And he was asking a lot of questions that I thought were really legitimate questions that I didn't have an answer to. And he said, that's too bad you can have some lawmakers on. I said, well, actually tomorrow, literally tomorrow, right, there's two going to be on. So it was kind of a last minute thing. We decided to kind of get into this, and it's kind of rare that we just pick one topic and talk about it for the bulk of the show. But I think it's an important topic to talk about. So I gave you guys a heads up yesterday. I sent you an article that I read from Wisconsin Watch. And I don't know if it's liberal or left-leaning or right-leaning. I have no idea. Their headline was, half of Wisconsin school districts go to referendum amid debate over state aid for public education. So I'd like to talk about that with you guys. Let's start first with just, I suppose, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Romaine, I'll start with you. Good or bad? We should probably just establish that first. Is it good that we're having a lot of referendums, or is it a bad thing or an other?
Well, it's a mix, right? Because I think it's important first to differentiate the fact that there's two different kinds of referendums.
Romaine, hold on a second. Do you have something on your computer or speaker? Because all of a sudden you're like muffled.
I don't think so.
Oh, that's better. Maybe just a little closer.
Maybe my trash bag was covering them.
I think that's what it was, actually. Yeah. All right,
really?
Go ahead.
No, I think, first it's important to define the difference between a recurring referendum or operational and one for infrastructure or buildings, right? So the size of school you want, the look of the school you want, the physical structure of the school you want, that's all in your community, and that's all on what you want to spend. Now, obviously, your operational revenues should hopefully cover the maintenance and upkeep of that. Sometimes it doesn't. So that's a big difference. So I think there's like 100 referendums, 120 referendums, about 50 of those or 45 of those are structural ones, meaning for school buildings. So that is not a state issue in my mind. It's a community owned and built school. That's on the locals. So, but the other ones are operationally. And so I think schools are facing the same thing we're all facing, inflation. I mean, rising costs for their contracted services, for food, for utilities, for maintenance. You have to pay your staff more, like everyone else, to keep up with rising wages, which is good for employees, but it's all going right back out the door with the cost of living. So I don't think schools are immune from the effects of inflation either. They're feeling the pinch as well.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. And Dave, I'll get to you in just a second here, because next, after we kind of go through a couple of questions, I was hoping to kind of start establishing what is the cause of this. I mean, is this a problem or is this a symptom? And I kind of wanted to get a comprehensive list going, and that's one of them, inflation. So I'm glad you brought that up. Dave, what about you? Is this, again, just trying to establish, is this a good thing, a bad thing, or other?
See, and I don't know if it's good or bad. I think it's just the way things are. I mean, if you look at, and I've been doing a lot of discussions here in Barron County alone, because I work so closely with the school districts for childcare or other issues. Declining enrollment's huge. All right. They get paid by the state based on enrollment. So with declining enrollment, they've got, the school districts have some challenges, and they've also got to look at how are you educating kids in a declining enrollment environment, and do things need to be tweaked? I don't know. That's the whole issue that we've been dealing with here. And I think, Romaine, they had a select committee, I think, before I was in, on education to look at all of this, I think. And I remember seeing a report somewhere, but it's been a while since I saw it. So I don't know what came out of that committee, and as far as recommendations, and did we ever actually put any of them in place. But I think you almost have to reimagine education right now with a declining enrollment. We're not having the kids we used to have, a generation or two ago. So some of the referendums I actually looked at were them, I think it was La Crosse was building a $53 million elementary school and closing multiple elementary schools. That's kind of the way it is right now. Declining enrollment, you're going to start pushing kids to one building. I mean, if you're closing 3 schools, does that mean you now have 3 less principal salaries, 3 less, yada, yada, yada? I don't know. So that's why I think the reimagining of education is probably needed.
I love that word, reimagining. Adam Jarko's calling. Should I answer the phone and put him on a live show?
That could be dangerous.
No, okay. I'll tell him I'll call him later. So what were you talking about, Dave, that Romaine was, what was it? What kind of a meeting, or what was it?
Well, I thought there was a select committee.
Select committee. Romaine? What's that about?
Romaine? Yeah, I was on it. It was the Speaker's Blue Ribbon Commission on School Funding. And so a bunch of us, private school, public school, school educators, management, stakeholders, we traveled the state, stopped at, I think, 5 or 6 different locations, unique school districts, all different, and just having that conversation of what works, what doesn't work, and what do we got to fix in the future. And Dave hit the nail on the head. I mean, for an example, I've got a number of emails about the school district of Superior. They are going to an operational referendum this cycle. After this budget, Superior was actually one of the largest recipients of increases in the state budget because we raised the low revenue ceiling. And so what is that? So right now we set a floor or a ceiling on what school districts can levy per kid. It's a combination of state aid and local property taxes. It was $10,000 a student. So if your community never passed a referendum, you were always at the floor, you were getting $10,000 per kid to educate that child. So envision districts like Maple, Superior, Cameron. There's a few others in our area that were the low spenders. So this budget, we raised them all to 11. So they all got $1,000 a kid more than they had just last year. And that will be built into their base budget forever, ongoing. And so it's still a struggle, though, because you've got a mix of federal aid falling off to the pandemic ending. Like Dave mentioned, you have the declining enrollment issue. Imagine, take a small district. Let's say 2 families move out of the area and take 6 kids with them. At $11,000 a pop, that's $66,000. That's the salary of a starting teacher plus benefits, right? And so if you're a small district that already only has 2 classrooms per grade, where do you find that teacher? right? Which teacher do you cut to make up that difference? Just because maybe life happened. A husband and a wife, two different families took a different job and they moved away. And all of a sudden next year you've got a teacher's salary hole in your budget. And how do you make that up? And so,
hold on a second. So that 11,000 that you're talking about for that school district, and those 6 kids go from, I'm here in Washburn County. We'll just say go from Spooner to Shell Lake or Cameron to Rice Lake. We'll stick with one. We'll just say Spooner to Shell Lake. So that means the next year Shell Lake would get that $11,000 per each one of those students, and Spooner loses that, right? Does any money stay at Spooner at all?
Well, it depends if they're physically moved out of the district or just open enrolling. So that's another can of worms we have to fix.
Wait, what do you mean?
So if
I live in Spooner, and all of a sudden I decide to take Kenneth and Raleigh, and next year, hey kids, you're going to go to Jerusha works in Shell Lake, right? The government building. So you're just going to go there, but we're still going to live in Spooner.
So not to get in the weeds,
okay. But I want to get in the weeds on this. I really do.
Okay, so there's a difference. There's an open enrollment transfer amount. Right now that's statutorily set at like $8,500 a kid. And so if your kids leave Spooner and open enroll into Shell Lake, $8,500 goes to Shell Lake, but Spooner gets to keep the difference. And so that's also a problem we have to fix, because if you've got 2 districts that are spending on far different levels, why is one district keeping a really substantial sum of money for a student they've never educated?
Wait, so that would be, so the $8,500, would that stay in Spooner, or that would go to Shell Lake?
That goes to Shell Lake with the student.
And the $3,500 that would be left over, no, $2,500 that would be left over would stay in Spooner.
For
how long?
For as long as your kid's in school and making that open enrollment.
And why? No,
right.
It's fine. Just like, why do we do that?
So as an example, there's a lot of kids that open enroll into the Cameron School District where I live. They come from Rice Lake, Chautauqua, Barron, a whole mix, right? Mm-hmm. And so there are districts around Cameron that spend a lot more than Cameron. And so when Cameron was at the low revenue ceiling at like $9,000 5 years ago, we raised that again before I left the assembly. And let's say Chautauqua Weyerhaeuser was at 11.5. Think of the difference there, $3,500. And that kid might have been open enrolling since kindergarten. So that district, that home district, may never have had that student ever and has been getting $3,500 for the entire span of that child's education, and the kid never set foot in the door. And so, eliminating that disparity is something we have to address as well. But the bigger piece, more in general, Ben, is if you moved your kids into Shell Lake, you got an apartment there, there is no open enrollment transfer then. Spooner gets nothing. They're just out that $11,000, whatever they spend. So that's where that kicker is, where, you lose a family, or you've got a large class that graduates and the ones below it aren't as big. Where do you find that difference?
Yeah.
That's the tough part.
David, looks like you want to chime in. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, and that's been the big issue. It's even worse if you got school districts that are up like the $14,000 range, because all of a sudden they're keeping $6,000 for doing nothing for the student. And I hear from, like you mentioned, Cameron School District. I've got the superintendent, Joe Lecision, on my economic development board. So I hear from them all the time of the challenges that they've got with open enrollment, and they do great with open enrollment because apparently they've got a great program there, so people want to be there.
So I'm glad you brought up superintendents, but before we get to that, there's a question. First, here's a couple of things. So Michelle, by the way, good morning. Michelle said, you know what? That's the wrong one. Sorry. This is the first one. An example of the problem is having from Somerset, Wisconsin, they are paying teachers and admin way above the average. So I have not really heard that before. I've never actually heard part of the problem with the funding for the schools is we're paying, teachers and administrators more, but it looks like maybe above average. But that's a school decision, isn't it?
Yep. Local board makes that decision.
Sure.
Yep. And part of it too is what do you, unfortunately with the market you've got now, even Barron County, let's throw education out for a minute. Let's talk about just careers in general, all jobs. We've still got 900 to 1,000 open jobs in Barron County I can't fill because we don't have the people. So what does that do to wages? They go
Right.
up.
Yeah. Law enforcement has
Right.
increased as well. They're trying to, but we've talked to that with Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald on the show. I'm like, all right, fine. If it goes from like say $25 an hour, and I'm making these numbers up here, they're not accurate. Like $25 an hour for a deputy to $30 an hour. Screw it. Let's just say we go to 50. Does that solve your problem? And he's like, not really. It helps, but it doesn't actually solve the problem. Here's the other one from another from Sarah. Are private school vouchers hurting the public schools? Thank you, Sarah. Great question. Dave, why don't you start with that?
Sure. I don't know if they are or not, because let's go back to open enrollment again, because I still kind of look at, all right, if you're open enrolling, school districts are getting X amount of dollars for doing nothing if they're open enroll out of that one. So with private voucher schools, you got X amount of dollars that are flowing in that go to the private schools. I don't see a big difference between the private schools again and open enrollment. I mean, from my perspective.
Okay, Romaine, what about you? What do you think? Are private school vouchers hurting the public schools?
So I would say it depends on how you define hurt, right? I mean, at the end of the day, these are still kids. They deserve a quality education. And if they were in the public school, we'd still be spending money on them in the public school, right? And so at the end of the day, we got to spend the money. It's just which building they're going to be in. And remember, these are only students whose families meet a certain economic threshold. And so it's not the wealthy getting subsidized here, right? The income limits in northern Wisconsin are even less than the parental choice program in Milwaukee, which is a joke. I've been trying to change that for years. So I think a family of four in the school choice, meaning like outstate Wisconsin, I don't think you can make more than like $46,000 a year to even qualify. And so we're not subsidizing the wealthy by doing that. But I would say, perfect example, look at the situation in Rice Lake with St. Joe's. I think St. Joe's attracts families potentially from out of the area. St. Joe's doesn't have a high school, and so it's a natural feeder of students into the Rice Lake High School.
Sure.
So Rice Lake knows that those 200 kids going through St. Joe's at some point are going to wind up in their building, feeding their high school, which also feeds their enrollment. And so I don't view them as adversaries anymore, because there was a study done, not a study, an actual Fiscal Bureau memo put out, that if we were to close down the Milwaukee Choice program, there was a Racine program, Milwaukee program, and then the rest of us chumps get a different program with less money.
Of course.
But if you shut down the Milwaukee one, Milwaukee spends so much money in the public school that by sending the kids out of private school back into the public school, it would actually mean less money for our districts in the state, because more general aid would be flowing into MPS than outstate. I don't know if that made sense to you at all, but
Milwaukee, it seems that I don't understand, and I don't want to even get to that on this show, because I think that's probably going to be a long conversation. But the Milwaukee school district, that whole thing, it's so weird, right? It's like its own entity.
it's huge.
It's just really bizarre that we do a lot of that.
Speaking of referendums, on that note, Milwaukee just passed a $400 million, $500 million, an obscene amount of money for referendums. And so because of that, if the state is not going to add more into the general aid formula, Milwaukee is going to pull money out of our schools down to theirs because they passed a referendum first. So our office went and calculated the amount. So the districts in the 25th Senate District are going to be getting about $1.1 million less ongoing starting next year than they are getting this year, just because Milwaukee passed a referendum, right? It's complicated, but it's interesting.
Dave, when you talk to superintendents, I'm sure there's several, actually many, in your district, in your 75th, and now soon to be, or going to be 67th. But in the last couple of years, or 4 years, you talk to superintendents. What concerns are they bringing to you regarding this topic of funding?
Well, they always have issues with funding.
Sure, of course, and that makes sense, right? It totally does. Yeah. But I mean, is there ideas? Is it just, hey, Dave, why aren't you guys getting us more money? Is that it, or are they getting a little more detailed as to why or how?
Yeah, the detailed stuff comes, like we had already talked to, from the districts, maybe low revenue districts, or discussions about why does X amount of dollars stay with the current school district. But when you get into the weeds a little bit more, I have a lot of discussions on mental health. A lot of discussions. You got to get the aid for mental health and for disabilities, etc., up. I mean, I did a budget motion on that for last time, and naive Dave, I figured we'll go for a 10% increase. Well, in that alone was over $300 million, just a 10% increase. Well, that I got 5% for special ed, so which is great, but since that time, still getting more discussions on it. And what's unfortunate about it is you'll have third graders, and these are some of the stories I hear. I mean, you'll have third graders that trash a classroom. Third graders trash a classroom. They got to get all the other kids out of the classroom, and they've got to get a teacher and an aide or more, or maybe the police there to deal with the 3-year-old that's trashing. But that falls under the guise of the special education and the mental health. And I got a problem with that. I mean, if I was a 3-year-old and I would have trashed, I don't know if I would be here today, because my parents may have eliminated me, and that's the kind of challenges they've got. Barron School District had to create a classroom for 5 kids that you couldn't put them in with the other students.
Sure.
Again, special education money. So I know this go around, there's going to be another increase for special ed, but jump back to one thing you said when you started this little question is, Dave, you've got how many school districts in your district? All right. When I look at Barron County alone, I've got 8. It's a 30 by 30 square. I've got 8 school districts. I've been told many times, Dave, don't even talk about this, political suicide. But why do I have 8 school districts in a 30 by 30 square? I don't know.
Okay, so I see what you're saying. So it's like the topic going back to law enforcement. There has been discussion, and I think I even said with Fitzy, I said, I'm pretty sure, like in 5 years, mark it down right now, in 5 years from now, I would be shocked if at least one of our Washburn County City Municipality law enforcement, like the Spooner Police Department, Shelby Police Department, whatever, doesn't merge with the sheriff's office. Meaning that you still keep a chief of police, maybe part-time and full-time, do ordinances and a lot of things that you should probably have. But instead of having 4 employees that cost $100,000 each, take $200,000, give it to the sheriff's office, and make sure they have 24/7 coverage in your area. It saves the city money, blah, blah, blah. That seems to be like nothing should be off the table when we're talking about this. So I think that's where you're going with that. Is that a possibility? Because you're right. That is like a political third rail. Like, you don't talk about that. But
exactly,
there should be nothing off of the table at this point. Not saying we should do it, not advocating for it, but everything should be on the table.
Well, and I agree. And I don't know if there should be less, but that's the whole point when I start. Here's a discussion I had when I picked up the the upper part of Dunn County now as part of the 67th. Right away, now I'm in CISA 10. They've got that for an area versus CISA 11. All right, first thing I do is I get a call from CISA 10. Come on in and talk to us about funding. Okay, so went into funding, and their ask was, all right, in each of the school districts, we need CTE teachers. And when I was in school a long time ago, it was called home ec. Now they're called something else. All right. So we need one of those in every school district. And I said, all right, I get it. And the cost of one of those is probably $100,000 per one of those. But like I said, all right, now I understand what you're saying. I love CTE, from that side of it, because I work with them all the time to get them jobs here with employers. But all right, I've got Barron and Cameron 5 miles apart. Give it 6 miles apart. And I've got Rice Lake another 8 miles north of that. So I need to have one of these in every single one of those school districts if they're 5 miles apart. Okay. Can't we look at a different model where instead of one in every school district, let's build a little center, get a business to donate.
And have them all go there.
Yeah, it's going to increase the costs of transportation, but
not that.
If I look at those, I got about $1.6 million, $1.7 million just in Barron County, and just those 2 teachers in every school district.
Sure. Romaine, is everything on the table, or are there still some things that no? We can never go down that road. Maybe it's political too, Republican, Democrat. Maybe it is just some like nobody wants to be the party that actually brings this up because it's political suicide. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think it depends. The most political answer I can give you. Geography of the district. So Barron County is in a certain boat where you've got, Cameron kind of in the middle and everyone kind of surrounds them.
Mm-hmm.
But you get up north in the rest of my Senate seat, you go up to Butternut, Mellon, Drummond. There's nothing near the Drummond School District.
Right.
Drummond has to exist. If Birchwood went down, if you're a kid on the east side of Birchwood and Birchwood closed and went to Rice Lake, where do you go? You're 45 minutes one way to Rice Lake. So I think we have to have a conversation at a minimum. What do we find acceptable for length of distance traveled? Or
and then you throw all those kids in, even with declining enrollment, you're still pumping a lot more kids into this one. And now we're talking kids to student ratios again, which is probably already too high. Well, I mean, I guess if enrollment is going down in some schools, that will, I guess, kind of help that situation, which probably isn't good. So obviously it would be unique, but at least just a discussion, right? Nothing should be off the table. Speaking of the northern part, Tamara has, does anyone know? I don't know what the Minong one is. Northwood in Minong has a referendum proposed, and I'm unsure what to vote on it. Actually, Tamara, if you can let us know what that is, or maybe you guys, Romaine, you might know or maybe know. I'm all for helping students and the staff. I'm with you, Ben. Want to get into the weeds of it all. Yeah, and thank you again, both of you, for getting into the weeds with some of this stuff. Northwood and Minong, do either of you know what that one is?
Yeah, I mean, it's in my Senate seat. I've toured the school. It's a great school. But I don't know if it's a building referendum or if it's an operational referendum.
Sure. All right. So where does Act 10 fall in this? Is that where does it fall into this? Is that still, are we seeing some of the effects of that?
So I think there's a number of issues with Act 10, but just from a money standpoint, because Act 10 right now is on the chopping block. The state Supreme Court does not care about precedent, and they are willing to undo any reform of the last 14 years if the right person litigates the right issue and brings it before them. And Act 10 is making its way to them. And so Act 10 potentially could be overturned, even though it was found constitutional 3 different times. So what was just the nuts and bolts of it, right? We can talk about collective bargaining. Do public employees have a right in state statute to collectively bargain? But the numbers behind it, right? That was about requiring employees to pay 12.5%, I think, of their health insurance and up to 6% of their pension costs, which Dave and I fall under too as state legislators. So if that goes away, and let's say the unions come back, we start back from where we left in 2010. If you think school districts are broke now, they will be really broke.
How? Why? How does that connect?
Because how do you find how can you go from having your employees pay 12.5% of their health insurance to nothing? Or how can you have employees go from paying 6% of their retirement to now nothing, and you're required to pay 100% of it? No, I'm not saying what's right or wrong, or teachers shouldn't be compensated more. They absolutely should, especially in this environment. I don't know how teachers do what they do, and I think all of them every day, they have the most important job, obviously raising the next generation. So, but when you, not as important as running an online news outlet. But at the same time, is we have to be reasonable in terms of our costs. So, but it's not just schools, right? Every county government, every municipal government, all those employees fell under this and were required to pay more in, which a lot of people were upset about at the time. I get that. But I don't know where you find that money overnight. If schools are broke now, I don't know how you go back to the days of employees not making contributions and the school district picking up the whole tab.
Dave, what is your view on that?
Well, on the same order, I mean, I wasn't around for the Act 10 side, so I didn't see the full impact of it. But I know if you start loading those costs back into the school district, that kind of costs certainly aren't going to be picked up by the local taxpayer. They're going to come because you couldn't suck that up through the amount of property taxes if you had to. That's going to come directly down to the state. What's that going to do to the state budget? I don't know, And on the discussion of teachers, I've got 2 of my daughters are teachers. One's a teacher in New York, one's here in the Rice Lake school system. So I hear about the teaching side of it all the time, and I get it. Love teaching. Like I said, 2 of my daughters are. But part of it goes back to, and I know you probably can't look at it the way, let's look at school districts, education as a business model. All right. I've owned numerous businesses, started numerous businesses. If I'm losing my customers, which the school districts are, the children, I've got to make adjustments within my business structure to be able to keep offering that service, education. Is that happening to the extent that it needs to? I don't know. That's part of the discussions that I think need to happen. Is there a different model needed for education now that enrollment is decreasing? Right, and I
That,
think this year, 2025, is the lowest graduation or time, pupil enrollment since they tracked it in Wisconsin. So, and it's not going to go up. I mean, we're not having more kids. We're not having a plethora of people move into Wisconsin. So we've got what we've got. So again, looking back at, and I'm not castigating education at all. It's more of let's work together to figure out how we do this maybe differently. I
yeah,
don't
I've
know.
always looked at everything from a business standpoint too. Churches, I've always looked at it as a business, and I don't mean it. I mean, they're of course in the business of saving souls, but still, it's a business in terms of you have to have people come in, you have to have them tithe, you still have payments. I mean, everything you could kind of look through the lens of a business.
Right.
So I can appreciate that. I really can. And you had talked about oh, jeepers, Brian. Oh, this is fun. You talked about, now you got, I read this comment and now I can't unthink about it. We need to fire Evers and get rid of DBI for starters. So I wanted to bring that. Now I love Brian. He's one of my peers on the county board. But, going back to the Sheriff Fitzgerald talking about more money for cops. Is that going to solve the problem? No. But, they should get paid more. Teachers should get paid more. But also, nurses should get paid more. EMTs should get paid more. County board supervisors should get paid more. I'm just throwing that one out there for no particular reason. We all should get paid $100,000 a year. That'd be wonderful. But there's only so much money. So how do we, allocate that without raising taxes? Now, if I recall, so one of the things that you had talked about, inflation. Romaine, you said at the very beginning of the show, inflation, of course, that has hurt everybody. And schools are not exempt to that. I thought I read in that article, or maybe it was a different article, I can't recall, the one from Wisconsin Watch, that at one point, our general aid and our funding was tied to inflation, but it isn't anymore. If it was tied to inflation, so that would adapt and be able to adjust, so that would obviously help when these things are happening, up and down. Would that be good or bad? Romaine, I'll ask you.
It's hard to say. I mean, if we gave everything and everyone CPI, I think the state would be broke, especially with the inflation that we've seen. I mean, you're talking about what, 20% in the last 3 years, 2 years, depending on what you're counting, what's in, what's out, what year you're talking about. But I don't know. I think it forces legislators to make hard decisions, which I think is our job and we should be doing. No different than when we stopped indexing the gas tax. It's like, why didn't you leave that? So the gas tax naturally kept increasing over time. Well, to me, that's a cop-out as a legislator, right? I should have to take that vote, or I have to work really, really hard to find other sources of revenue to make sure roads are funded. Now we're doing the same thing with schools. And I think it makes us think about things more. So, for instance, a lot of districts don't benefit from general aid. The school district of Birchwood gets like $8,000 a year. Drummond gets like $5,000 a year. Out of the $5.8 billion we spend, Birchwood gets like $8,000. And so you could index general aid to CPI, but that doesn't help everybody. And so I think by doing it the way we're doing it, we make conscientious decisions to try to solve problems. And that's what I've always tried to do is, last budget we raised the low revenue ceiling. So those districts on the floor got the biggest bump. We added more money for sparsity aid, for high cost transportation, trying to target the areas that cost money to unique districts to level that playing field. So right now, whether you're in Superior or you're in Madison, you shouldn't have obstacles that keep you from providing a quality education just due to your geography, weather, the size of your community, or where you're spread out, right? How do we even that playing field? And then you can really make that apples to apples comparison. Okay, why is it that Turtle Lake can make it and not go to operating referendum, but Abbotsford can't, right? And so at that point, then as a taxpayer, I can ask these questions if I know the playing field's even. Because for all the districts that are going to operating referendums, there's a lot more that aren't. So how are they doing it? And others aren't. Now, granted, there's a lot of variables in there, which we kind of went over, right? Where's their spending today? What are their unique costs? Like, as an example, not to get in the weeds more, but high cost transportation. If I'm spending $11,000 per pupil, I'm on the floor or the ceiling. My neighbors are spending 13, but I have, let's say, $1,200 a year just in transportation costs for my kids, just to get them to the door. And my neighbors is $500 because their district is smaller, right? So, but I'm supposed to provide the same quality of education, but I'm spending $1,200 a kid just to get them to the door. That's not educating them. That's just busing them to and from the school. So in reality, I'm spending $9,000 a kid trying to get them an education, while the neighbor is spending 13 because half their kids walk to school because the town might be, more concentrated. So how do we address the unique challenges? And I think by just targeting something to CPI and saying, yep, I think it allows us to almost take a cop out and not fix problems at the same time.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that, Dave?
Yeah, exact same thing. I mean, you mentioned, can you do it without raising taxes? For example, Act 10 goes away. No, we're going to see a huge tax increase. There's no way you can increase costs that much, especially if you expect it just to be on property taxes. Ain't going to happen. It's going to come down to the state and start sucking up budget monies. All right.
Well, didn't we have like a $3 billion deficit before Act 10? And that ended up not the only thing, but that was a massive contributing factor to then having a surplus. Wasn't that a huge part of that?
Well, yeah, and then if you look at when they took away the indexing part, I think that was 2009. That was a couple of years before Act 10 even started. So that wasn't something as a result of Act 10. That was done by a previous legislature.
During the recession.
Even last session, last session itself, we raised $1 billion, I think is what went into was the up in education. If you look at it, 30 million of it was just mental health, 188 million of it just special education. So if you start looking at where did this money go and as a result of what, that's like Romaine said, that's the discussions you've got to have every single budget cycle of what areas need more. Yeah, the per pupil, you're always talking about the per pupil piece, but get down into the weeds of the budget. I think people will be surprised when they start looking at the line item of it, where DPI is spending money on what.
So that was the reason I wanted to put Brian Melton's comment up there. First of all, I think Brian's just hilarious. Everyone needs a Brian Melton in their life. Just saying, I love that guy. But what are you talking about? Getting rid of DPI for starters. I wanted to remember that part. So you had just mentioned DPI again. How is DPI doing? Is that something? Is that a contributing factor to any of this, or is it no? I mean, it doesn't matter what they're doing. We passed this because I don't understand how that connects. Law, you guys make a law, or you're funding. We do the budget. We give money. Does it go to the schools? Where does DPI play a role in that? And is that a contributing factor to this, Romaine?
So I think, make no bones about it. Every metric, every comment, and I have a fly that's all over me. Of course, it's Halloween. Everyone I have talked to in the education field is not happy with the state of DPI right now. This is from superintendents. Some of them say it publicly. Some of them will not say it publicly. But DPI, in a time where if districts are struggling, they could be an asset, and they are not. And sometimes they're actually a hindrance. I know DPI, for instance, the school district of Mellon, talking with their superintendent and staff, have gone after them because they don't have supposedly enough material for their Native American population students that go to the Mellon School District, even though they believe they met everything. So at a time where DPI is supposed to be supporting districts, a lot of them times are throwing them through a loop. So I think Dr. Jill Underling is going to have a hell of a time getting reelected.
I don't see that happening. Just throwing that out there right now. I do not see that happening at all for a number of reasons.
Endorsed by the teachers union. So she's getting flanked from her own side. And that's without any conservative-minded candidate jumping in. So I think you're going to see a lot of proposals or press releases or something to keep her relevant going into the next cycle.
We just published one of those. It was about, and then after that, then they were sending tons of them. I'm proposing this. I'm proposing this. I'm proposing this. I only did one of them because I just thought it was an interesting topic. and that was about school lunches, I think, like just to make them free for everyone. And I really just wanted to hear kind of what people's thoughts were, and it was very engaging. I really enjoyed the conversation on social media. But yeah, there does seem to be a whole bunch all of a sudden, and I'm like, what's going on? Why all of a sudden now?
Someone's up for re-election.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a complicated question. Obviously, I'm sorry. It's a complicated answer. It's a simple question. So how do you answer it? If when you look around the political landscape, and we always want to find blame somewhere, and we want the easy answer, and I'm sure you guys have heard this too. So, and I'm assuming the answer you usually hear, as being Republicans as you are, is you guys are screwing this up, and really what that means is you're not giving enough money. So how do you answer a simple question simply? Because it sounds like it's complex. But how do you answer that? Why aren't you giving more money? And if you just did that, everything would be fine. How do you answer that question, Dave?
Go ahead. How much is enough? See that's a question I have.
More.
Exactly. And more to which school district, and what does it mean to each of those school districts? That's the problem I've got. You've got Camerons that are apparently excelling at $11,000 a student, and some of the other ones that are maybe losing open enrollment to Cameron, maybe getting $14,000. And so that's where I don't know. And back to your question on DPI, I've been around 2 sessions. That's it. All right. So I look at DPI, fortunately or unfortunately, as more of a quasi-political organization than it really is an education organization, to be honest with you. Because I've seen the mandates that come out, and is it education mandates, or are they more political mandates? That's where I'm confused with it, because to me it seems more like a quasi-political organization. So I've got problems with that.
Romaine, what about you? How do you answer? I'm sure you get that question a lot from your constituency, from taxpayers to superintendents to teachers to principals. Just give more money. Right. Why aren't you just doing that?
Yeah, 2 things. One, I think it's important to step back and look at the big picture overall, right? So for years and years and years, we were hammered because the state was not meeting its 2/3 funding obligation. So for years, the state, up until 2006, I think, which would have been under Governor Doyle, I believe, repealed its mandate to fund 2/3 of education, locals picking up 1/3. And so under Walker, we were slowly creeping back up there, but never quite got there. So under this budget, with the $1 billion increase we put in, we're now at 68.5%. So we are exceeding the state's 2/3 commitment for funding for public education. If you look, it's still the largest budget item in the state budget. There's not anything we spend more money on in Wisconsin as a single item than K through 12 education. Nothing's even close. And so when you look at those amounts, and I'll step back even further, when Tony Evers first decided to run against Governor Walker back whatever year it was, he was still state superintendent of public instruction at the time. And he had proposed spending, he had requested $600 million more for schools back at that time. Well, by the time the budget was over during Walker's last year, we gave schools the exact amount that Tony Evers wanted, that he had requested back then. No one wanted to talk about it, right? They hammered Walker for not giving the schools more money, but we appropriated the same amount of money then Superintendent Tony Evers wanted, and it still wasn't enough. So it's almost, I mean, there's reality and then there's politics, but like Dave mentioned, it is never enough, but it's also, again, how you spend it. We already talked about the intricacies of how does money get to a district. Some don't get general aid. Some only get per pupil. Some don't qualify for sparsity, but they get high cost transportation. So it depends on how you spend it too.
All right. So we could talk for like 2 hours on this, and I still think I wouldn't fully understand all of it. But let's at least try to figure out what's the next plan, or because we have a budget coming up, obviously, in January after the election here next Tuesday. Then I think one of the first things that everybody does is, start the budget process. What's on the table right now? Have you heard of any discussions about what we're looking at doing as a legislature for education in the next budget. And then also, how do we fix this? So if it's just throwing money at it, and I understand it's a complex answer, but is there a relatively simple answer to simply, so how do we fix it? What's the plan? We've identified a lot of the reasons, a lot of the symptoms, but okay, so what's the plan? Romaine, I'll start with you.
Well, part of it is we have to work on every issue, right? Because all the societal issues we see fall in the laps of our school districts, like Dave mentioned early on, right? Our schools are expected to be the one-stop shop for mental health services. We have teachers that are helping parents fill out job applications because they know their child's not going to learn in their classroom if their parents aren't in a good setting, right? And so we see more and more fall in schools. So I think a lot of it is we continue to address problems outside the school system to take some of that off their plate. How do we continue to work on housing, on mental health, on supports that families need, on hunger, so students come to school ready to learn? So take some of these struggles off of their plate to begin with, and then we have to continue to look, budget wise. So the problem is, like anything, there is no quick fix, and everyone has a different opinion, right? And so there's legislators, Dave and I's counterparts, that are in school districts that are suburban and very wealthy. They already spend a lot of money. They don't think their schools need any more money. They've got it to spend, but they don't want to spend it, versus a Birchwood, who has a heck of a time passing a school district referendum because we know 70% of the parents in that district qualify for free and reduced lunch. So they can't afford any property tax increases, right? So there's so many nuances. There's so many differences. There's a lot of but there's so much different between districts that there is not one bullet. So I'll end with this. Perfect example. I live in the Cameron School District out east of Cameron. If my house was 5 miles to the north of where I am right now, I would pay half of the property taxes I do today because I'd be in the Birchwood School District. So I pay nearly twice as much in property taxes to be in the Cameron School District, the way the system's funded, than I would if my house was just 5 miles north. Now, do my economics change that far apart, 5 miles? No. Does the culture change, the needs, the wants, desires of students or their parents change in 5 miles? No. So I think we are going to have bigger, high-level conversations of how we do things. And that's with every level of government, county, municipal, not just schools. We got to start having those larger top-down views of the overall bigger picture, like Dave mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and Dave, you had mentioned at the very beginning, I love the word that you had used, and that was reimagining. Do you essentially, that's kind of what I'm hearing from Romaine on that. Do you echo that? Is it instead of just throwing the money at the problem, not saying it doesn't need more money or we couldn't do more money, but first, we kind of need to reimagine it. There's a lot of people who do believe that our public education system has been a public disaster almost ever since its inception. It has continued. We put more money in and scores go down. There are a number of people who actually believe that. I don't necessarily agree with that entirely, but maybe we need to start reimagining. Let's kind of, what are we doing now? And let's start looking at those bigger pictures and how can we tweak the things that we're doing right now? Or is it still, again, putting more money into it? Dave, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not ready to roll a grenade into the room and blow everything up.
Yeah, right.
And start over. But a big piece of this too is let's look at mandates. All right, you've got the feds mandating that the states do X amount of dollars. Well, special ed is a great example of that. Well, Christ, if you're going to put some kind of mandate on us, fund the damn thing, because otherwise it's up to the states to come up with the money to fund a federal mandate. No, that's not cool, right? Not. So we've got to look at that. And again, I got to look at some of the things that DPI does as far as mandates to the school district as well. Is there too much regulation? Is there too many mandates? Absolutely. Yesterday, I'm on the youth apprenticeship steering committee here for CISA 11. Went to that, right? They've got 4 new career pathways that are coming out. They're waiting for DPI to finish up the curriculum for those 4 career pathways. That sent a shudder down my spine because I certainly don't want an educational entity DPI creating job requirements for a business. Why? But the question in the room was, well, when that's going to happen? Well, we don't know. Well, wait a minute. We're already into the 24-25 school year, and you don't have the career pathways done yet. So again, it's part of the mandates, part of the organization. The one thing still that I'm going to have to see if I can get a hold of is that the select committee that you were on, Romaine, and look at the suggestions that came out of that. I don't know how many were implemented, but and that's another discussion point. Do we implement some of those, and will that help? I would imagine it would, since you spent so much time traveling the state and looking at it. But again, that should be kind of the all of the above to-do list here if you're going to reimagine education.
I think what people would rather have, and maybe it's just because it's an election cycle, they just want, we need more money for education. Like, I think that's what people just want. Yes, we do. Right?
Well, part of it, too, is the state, all the agencies, I think, at this point have given the governors their want list for the next, next budget cycle. I saw the 800, or the UW system wants $800 million alone, just an increase in their UW system. Fine, I'm not, castigate that. All right, let's have a discussion on that. Let's figure out, why do you want $800 million? But then again, just this morning, I saw an article saying that one of the two-year colleges, not ours up here, lost enrollment by 45% and went down. 45%. Now, you just lost 45% of your customers. What are you going to do differently?
I don't know. Before we wrap this up, obviously we have an election on Tuesday. Romaine, you're not. Just remind me, Romaine, so you're the 25th district senator, but so like when do you become the 23rd district senator, and how does that work?
So we're elected to our numbers.
Yeah.
And although the maps change, we stick with the number. And so I'm still the senator for the 25th.
And you will be for the next 2 years.
Yes. But it doesn't, unless we get sued or something. I'm sure it never ends. But so the new 25th has a little bit different geography, but I'm the senator for that number. And so, and then in 2 years, anyone can roll the dice and make a decision on who's doing what.
Yeah. All right. And Dave, you are going to be, so I'm looking at this map here this morning, and it's on our pubs. It's the Assembly district map for Wisconsin, and it is using models from 2022 outcomes, and it's kind of looking at all our Northwest Wisconsin districts, for example, and like how they would vote. It doesn't mean this is how many they're going to actually get, but the 73rd, as we've talked before, is now 61.3% Democrat, again, according to this model, or 2022 modeling. The 74th, that'd be Chan's, that's 61% Republican. The new 75th, that's 65%. The 68th, which I believe is the old 87th, Jimmy Boy's seat, that is 69% Republican. And according to this, the 67th, the one that you were on for on Tuesday, is 66% Republican. Now, of course, this doesn't take into consideration candidates from 22 and candidates 2024. So it's not like that's a prediction of who's going to win and by how much. But it doesn't look like any of these races are really all that going to be that competitive.
It depends. Again, it's who turns out to vote. Has there been any change in the demographics of the district since the last election? There's going to be slight changes, but no. And I think before in the 75th, I had like a 64% red district. So I'm now, I guess, supposedly 66%.
People get 68%.
Yeah.
What's that, Romaine?
I said it's a 66 generic on a generic ballot, but Dave will get 69% of the vote.
Really? Well, there you go.
He thinks he's more positive than I am, because I always take it for granted I'm going to lose, so I got to work my ass off.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm just saying
that. The number is 68%.
Yeah, if you do that. Yeah, but I mean, just in terms of competitive races, I don't know how many points you guys would put on that. I would say anything, well, certainly single digits, but really, I would say even just like 6 points. Like 53-47, I would consider that then a competitive district. I think you start even getting into 8 points, and it's kind of not like 54-40. That's not really that competitive. And I'm just saying, it appears to be just on paper and the models, would be our area, including the 73rd, which will certainly be Democrat. No real competitive districts in northwest Wisconsin at all. And is that good or bad? I don't know. It is what it is, I guess.
Both Chans and Angie had to work their butts off to win.
Yeah.
And now they took 2 competitive seats and made a guaranteed lock for each party. I mean, like literally the definition of gerrymandering. But we fixed it. Don't worry, we fixed it.
All right. Any last words, Dave? We'll start with you.
No, it was a lot of fun. Good being back on again. Great discussion points. And again, not set on anything nothing set in stone, but I'd like to have the discussion at least, especially on this education piece. We'll have to have it on the UW system as well. Because all these discussions are good. Yeah,
it was fascinating. And I still don't feel like I really understand everything yet. I mean, I suppose that's tough to, would you stop it with that thing? So best wishes and good luck to you on Tuesday. Dave, Romaine, final words?
Happy Halloween.
Yep, absolutely. Hope the kids get lots of candy.
Well, I don't know. We're supposed to get like 4 or 5 inches of snow here this afternoon up in Washburn County. Special thank you to our guest today, Wisconsin's 25th District Senator Romaine Quinn and the 75th Assembly District Representative for only, I don't know, not for much longer, because that's the 67th Assembly District. You'll be on the ballot on Tuesday. I will see all of you right back here on next Tuesday when Barron County Sheriff Chris Fitzgerald and I will be back for our latest episode of Positive Tuesday with Ben and Fitzy. Jack Fitzgerald wants you to put them. So he had it on at the very beginning. Do you still have it? All right, put it back on. Man.
Yeah.
Where is it? He wants you to put it back on.
I'll bring it to Madison for him.
Okay. All right, just watch the show at the very beginning because he freaked me out when he actually came on the show. So anyway, so until next Tuesday, thank you for watching, and as always, have a blessed day.